All right. Well, welcome everyone to our uh, webinar today. This is the second in the series of 4 webinars. My name is Nuno Couto. I am the founder of Optimal Campus. Just a brief background about Optimal, and then we will get started and pass it on to Lloyd. Optimal has been in operation since 2007. We focus solely on higher ed institution consulting. For a number of years, we actually focused only on IT within higher ed, including project management, implementation of large systems, software development, data warehousing, and many other IT areas. However, over the last few years, we have expanded to also do consulting on the university strategy side beyond IT. Our approach is to bring together the smartest, most experienced people from a network of thousands of higher ed professionals to solve big problems. And whether that's on the technology side or on the university strategy side, or even in the university operations side in terms of optimization. Today's webinar, however, focuses on how to evaluate potential academic programs and how to decide whether to begin a program or not, or at least how to gather that information and use a model to come up with a better decision. So for that, we've invited one of Optimal's senior consultants, Dr. Lloyd Russo, to join us. Lloyd is a professor emeritus and an academic entrepreneur with many years of experience as a program director of international programs, an associate business school dean, a graduate school dean. He assists multiple higher ed institutions in various strategic initiatives, including program identification and development. Dr. Russo is going to go over a model that he uses to evaluate potential new programs, something that he's been developing for many years, and he will answer your questions about that process. So with that, let me pass it on to Lloyd.
Hey everyone, thank you for joining us. As Nuno said, we're going to talk a little bit about how to evaluate the potential for new programs and specifically on how to build a pro forma budget. The agenda for today is I'd like to introduce myself a little bit too. Nuno has given me a very nice, gracious introduction. I'll add a couple other things to that, I think. Then we'll talk about the overall new program assessment process and some of the important aspects included in that. And then turn to focus on the institutional resource assessment. And then primarily from a financial perspective, we're looking at the pro forma budget. But we're also looking at the institutional resources in terms of faculty, administration, space, and whether or not the institution can leverage those existing resources, or whether or not they have to invest and somehow either hire or lease or purchase these resources that are needed to launch a program. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the key budget components to give you an idea of the sorts of things that are included in our analysis, and then some of the objectives of what we had to in building this budget template. I'll show a few report samples and the sorts of reports that come out of this analysis, and then talk a little bit about proprietary settings. Those might include things like discount rates, retention rates, those sorts of things that understandably institutions are loath to share with other people. And how do we include those in the analysis? And then I'll open it up to questions, and hopefully I can answer some of those questions. We'll see as we go along. So again, a little bit about myself. As Nuno said, I've been in higher ed for over 30 years. The entire time as a faculty member. And then also for most of that time as program director for international business programs at an institution. And as such, I've had a lot of experience with developing curriculum and designing programs. So that's some of the background that's related to this. I've also been associate dean, as Nuno said, and graduate dean for all the programs at the institution, at the university. And during that time, I got to meet program directors from across the institution, from architecture, business, of course, design, engineering, health sciences, and a myriad of others. So again, I have a better understanding of how the program directors work, and how they've built their programs and how the curriculum is built for those programs. And then for the last, I'd say 15 years, I've been working at in the provost office as an associate provost, but doing other types of, I want to say, other assorted duties, or duties is assigned really, but focusing on procedures that I want to say, for a while, focused on our merger with another institution. So I handled data analytics. We did lots of, again, how do you merge the program, the procedures of the two different institutions that did things differently. So again, so those are some of the background for what I've done over the past few years. And in the last 10 years, I've focused on new program development procedures and processes. So when we talk about the overall assessment of new programs, I like to look at it from the side of supply and demand, and then look at those components of those. So on the demand side, we look at employer demand. And that's based upon the skill sets, the credentials, the degrees that employers are looking for in their prospective employees. Then the student demand side would be composed of, again, derived demand really based upon what are the job opportunities, but also interests that they may have. And just as an example, one example I have is that I was working with an intern recently at another institution, and he said that he was interested in psychology and economics. And I have a background in behavioral psychology as part of my undergraduate degree. And I said, that's interesting. How does that work? And what he said is he was interested in analyzing the impact of economic development, of a country's economic development on society. And I said, I never thought of that before. But again, it brings together two what normally people would think of disparate studies. And if you knew that this person is Chinese, and that there are so many opportunities for this form of study and this discipline with all the countries that are still going through different stages of development in Africa and Asia and lots of other places, that this person has unforeseen possibilities by combining these two things. And like I said, I never thought of that before. So anyway, so that's the demand side. If we look at the supply side, we have to perform some sort of competitive analysis. So we would look for the location and the size of programs offered by other institutions that are similar or the same as the ones that we're proposing. And the competitive analysis helps us with a lot of other things too. When we're looking at the makeup of other programs, it helps us with developing the projected number of students for our new program that we're proposing. So it's a very important part of the supply side when we're looking at who the competitors are. And then what we're going to focus on today is the institutional resource assessment. And as I said, we're going to talk about and look at how to build a pro forma budget. So the webinar focuses on this budgeting tool, and something that's, as Nuno said, we've developed over quite a long period of time now. It's been about 10 years since we've been using this tool. And the tool itself incorporates several components on the revenue and the expense side. Expense side has been something I've seen in other pro forma budgets for a number of years, but it's the revenue side that might pose some difficulties for people to include, especially ones that, or budgets that include things like retention rates, discount rates, those sorts of things. because they all have an impact on the revenue. So we'll focus on those things today and talk a little bit about how we do that. So the budgeting tool that we use has a few, I'd say, major components that I'd like to mention. One is it has an option to include multiple revenue streams. So we've seen programs proposed that have both part-time and full-time students. And as we know, if it's a full-time student, they tend to go through the program more quickly and generate more income more quickly than a part-time student would. A part-time student might take a longer period of time to generate the same amount of income, depending, of course, on retention and so forth, and whether or not the tuition increases. But again, it's a different income stream. And what I've seen in these 200 programs plus that I've dealt with in the past 10 years is that there are other options for people to look at. So there may be somebody who has all the credentials they want, but want to upgrade their skill set. So some of the programs have developed certificates with maybe 3 or 4 courses that are part of the program that you're proposing, but it's, again, it focuses on a specific area. We've seen programs that build in continuing education units, or we've had programs that combine undergraduate and graduate programs, so a 4+1 or a 3+2 program. But in any case, they all deal with different revenue streams. And one of the things that's important to recognize is we need a way to capture that. So again, that's one of the, I think, major components of this budget tool. It also includes retention rates, and it's for each of the 5 years of the revenue streams. And again, those differ by discipline. So we may see different rates of retention rates for business over engineering. One of the surprising things I came across not too far back was that there was one institution that had architecture programs, and their architecture programs had a much higher undergraduate retention rate than all the others. And we really, we pointed that out and said, you might want to look at why that occurs. But so again, over different disciplines, but also over different levels. So we know that retention rates in the 80 to 90% range would be pretty good for an undergraduate program. For master's level programs, it might be higher. And then for doctoral level programs, it might be lower. Not 40%, but maybe 55 or 60%. And the same goes for discount rates. We've included a way to capture the discount rates offered to the students in different programs. And again, these differ by discipline. They differ by year. So there have been some institutions that have reset their tuition and then lowered their discount rates. So how do we manage that? And how do we incorporate that into this pro forma budget? There's also an optional revenue sharing bit to this program. I guess the easiest example for that would be if we're thinking about a new accounting program, an undergraduate accounting program, we recognize the fact that maybe 40% or more of the courses are not taught by the faculty in the School of Business. But what we normally include in a budget is, well, how many faculty do you need for this accounting program? It's coming out of the business school, so we need 2 faculty. But we're not accounting for the faculty needed for the other components of this program. And again, it's easy to show that with the undergraduate, but it also happens at the graduate level too, as we're talking about more interdisciplinary programs where we might, and I've seen this before too, where you have health sciences and architecture combined. We're talking about breathable walls. So again, it's more common now than it was in the past, especially at the graduate level. And how do we account for that? So again, it has no impact on the revenue that the institution might receive or on, as a matter of fact, on the margin, but is how is that income distributed within the institution? It's something that I think it's valuable to capture. It's not necessary to use that in this budgeting tool, but we can. So also on the revenue side too, we've also added something where you can add philanthropy. So if somebody decides, oh, well, this is a worthwhile program, I want to donate some money to this for, I don't know, student support. So we can include that. And the same thing with grant funding too. Anything that has is directly to offset some of the expenses listed in this pro forma budget, we want to capture that if we can. On the expense side, we have personnel, of course, and full-time and part-time personnel typically are split, so we can assign the benefits to the full-time faculty and FICA to the part-time personnel. But as we've seen, there are some institutions that are also providing some benefits for part-time personnel, so I want to capture that as well. There are many other types of expenses. So we have, of course, marketing expenses, we have travel, maybe accreditation, associated expenses, and so on. But those are the operating expenses. Then we also can capture capital expenses. So again, so we have the two, the revenue and expenses, and out of this comes a lot of different reports. We have an enrollment detail report that shows both the headcount and the credits generated by the students enrolled per year, per type. So if we have a group of full-time students, it shows that throughout the 5 years, and then with each new entering class. Then we have, if we have a part-time contingent, we have the same sort of report for those students. It's the head count, it's the credit count, and it's by that group per year. Then we show also the tuition and the fees generated from that, the difference between the gross revenue and the net revenue if there is a discount applied. And then we have, we combine all of it at the bottom to give you a total readout of all the different groups of students that might be enrolled. We also have a revenue and expenses report where the enrollment details are collapsed somewhat, and the focus is on the expenses. And in this report, we also show the margin both in dollars and in percentage. These two reports I've got samples of, and I'm going to show you those in a few minutes. But there are many other reports too. There's a break-even report that includes both the break-even, when can we expect to break even with this program, but it also includes the settings. So it will include things like, there's an entire table that shows the tuition throughout the years for each group, if there's a discount applied. There are all the different settings for benefit rates, tuition increases, and so forth. There's also a summary report. So this would be for upper level administrators. It might be for the board of trustees. It might be for the president that basically want to see just the enrollment and just the collapse of the revenue and the expenses side, and the margin, of course the margin. But again, what we'll do is we try to design these reports for specific users. And again, there are multiple reports, quite a few other reports as well besides these. So let's see. Okay, not seeing any questions just yet. Okay. So our objectives in designing this pro forma budgeting tool is we wanted to make sure it's useful. So we have 5 years of revenue and expenses plus a seed year. So the seed year would be in the year prior to launch. And again, we want to capture as much of this as possible as we can, and recognizing that in the year prior to launch, we're going to have to market the program. And we're also might have other expenses. There may be some course development expenses, or we may have to buy some equipment the year before. Whatever it is, we want to make sure that we capture that. And we want to make sure that we design something that users can make decisions about new programs, whether or not to launch new programs. We want to try to make this as representative of actual as possible. So we include lots of different variables and lots of different factors. So we do include progression rates of how students progress through the programs. And there can be different progression rates. So we've seen, again, not just part-time, full-time, but maybe an accelerated group. So I went back to school a little bit later than I should have for my graduate work. And I had to take all the foundation business courses. But of course, there are some students that go right from the undergraduate to the graduate. They don't need to take those. So that might be an accelerated group of students. But I've seen that in other disciplines as well. But we include that. We include the retention rates, discounting rates, changes to tuition, which again, we can use percentages, we can use running averages. Again, need to talk to people about how you want those calculated. But changes to the tuition, to fees, to operational expenses. So there may be planned raises for faculty over a certain period of time, for instance, changes to personnel benefits and other factors. What's important to realize here is that we have a settings tab in this, built into this pro forma budgeting tool, where all the settings about the benefits, the retention rates, discounting, all of those things are in one tab. And those are accessed typically by upper level administration. So it would be the CFOs. It might be somebody in academic affairs or the provost office. And those are behind the scenes. But they include all those sorts of things about, say, for instance, retention, which might come from institutional research office, or the discounting rates, which may come from admissions offices. So again, the data is collected, put on the settings page, and you can change it as frequently as you need to. So if you have tuition reset or something like that, you can go in there and change these settings, and again, it has an immediate impact. And I'm going to try to show you some of those things a little bit later on too. And then finally, we're looking at accuracy. So we've used this template on over 200 programs. It's changed a little bit over the 10 years that we've used this. But again, we test every aspect of it over and over and over again. So a couple sample reports. This is an example of at least a portion of the enrollment report, the enrollment details report that I mentioned before. So what we see here is the date it was prepared, the institution, the sponsoring unit. So in this case, the College of Arts and Science, the name of the program, MS in Nursing Leadership, and the point person. I like to have a point person so I know who to call if I have questions. And then something here too that I've included is, that I think is very important, is a CIP code. And what happens with that is meeting with the people who propose the program. So it might be the program director, it may be faculty who have designed some of the curriculum. I can go out and I can select maybe 2 or 3 or 4 different CIP codes and show the description to the faculty involved and say, does this reflect what you're doing? Does this describe the curriculum that you're proposing to include in this program? And the reason I like to do that is because these people are the content experts. I'm not. And I want them to help me select an appropriate CIP code. One of the aspects of this budget template is that I've got the entire 2020 CIP code list built into this. So it has all the titles, the CIP codes, the titles, and the descriptions. And I'll try to show this to you later, but it's important because I use this, and I think others would find it useful as well, in developing the competitive analysis. So again, we use this to identify the location and the size of programs that might be similar to this, or even the same. And where are they? Are they nearby? Are they going to be our competitors? We might look at specific institutions and say, these are our peer institutions, or these are our aspirant institutions. Where are they? What do they look like? How big are they? And so forth. So again, the CIP to me is a critical piece of information that I like to try to collect. But the rest of the report, so we have 4 groups of people here. We have a full-time contingent, a part-time group that are taking a certificate, a shortened version or a shortened set of curriculum, and then CEUs. So 4 different sets of students. And the part-time and the full-time are paying per credit tuition, and it's the same. The certificate is a comprehensive fee, as is the CEU. And the expectation is that they'll complete the program within a year, and the full-time will take 2 years, and the part-time will take 3 years. And I can show you that in a little bit as well, too. There are no semester fees, but we do include those as well as an option. There may be. But here we see that there are per credit fees for both the full-time and the part-time students, nothing for the certificate or CEUs. Just for a second. So what we see down here is just the full-time portion of this report. So the MSML full-time contingent, there are 36 credits in the program, and then the seed year plus the 5-year revenue stream. And it's launching in the fall of 2023. So it's the 2024 fiscal year that we're looking at. And the expectation is that we're going to have 3 students there coming in. They'll take 18 credits each. They'll take 18 credits each. So half the program in the first year. And then we'll see them also show up in the second year. Also 3 students taking 18 credits. In the second year, we've added another new 5 students. They're taking 18 credits, generating 90 credits. And again, we see the totals down here. Again, for each of the 5 years, and then the total for the entire period. We have down here the tuition. So the 18 credits times 3 times the $1,100 will come up with this figure down here, $59,400. But we have an 18% discount assigned. And so there's a difference between the gross revenue and net revenue. And then we have here the fee revenue generated by these students for the 18 credits each that they're taking times the per credit fee. And then the total revenue down here. There is no revenue sharing example for this. So that's the enrollment report. This would be an example of the revenue and expense report. So again, we've collapsed the enrollment statistics a little bit here. So actually, we're going to have 37 students in all 4 of those different groups, and they're going to generate 242 credits. In the second year, we have actually, here's the 3 students, the 3 full-time students that are continuing, and the 2 part-time students that are continuing, so that's the 5. And then we're going to have another 44 students in addition to that from all the other groups. Total. I don't include the gross revenue in this report. We could, but we don't, or the discount. But here we just see the net revenue, the tuition revenue, the fee revenue, the total revenue. And the total expenses, we go down here. In the first year, we have expenses of $16,500 here. And that's based on the marketing that we're going to do and this academic overhead. And right now, I've got the academic overhead set as 10% of operational expenses. But again, we set that depending on what the institution would like, if any. In the first year of launch, we hire a faculty member. So the expenses go up considerably. We also have some other type of labor included in this. And the benefits over here for these folks. So the personnel would be that. And then, of course, we have other operational expenses and so forth through the 5 years. And what we see is in the first couple of years, we have a negative margin. First year because we have no revenue, and the second year because we've added a faculty and we have not enough revenue to cover that person's salary and benefits. But as we go along, we can see that the margin grows, and it probably stabilizes somewhere between 30 and 35%, because as we grow, we'll probably have to add more faculty and more administration, more expenses, and so on and so forth. But overall, the margin would be 18% for this particular 6-year period post-launch. So I'm going to stop sharing here for a minute. Okay, and what I'd like to do is switch over to the Excel spreadsheet that I use. And I hope everybody can see this. So again, this looks suspiciously like what I had up here just a little while ago. A little bit larger maybe. But again, this would be the full-time contingent. The details on that enrollment. Then we have the part-time enrollment. As I said, there were 2 students in there coming in the first year and go through in 3 years. Then we have another 2 students coming in the second year. And then 3 students, and so forth. And then we have the certificate people. So here, the certificate is 12 credits, and we have 12 students coming in. They're going to finish it in 1 year. Okay. So you don't see any other numbers out here because they don't continue the program. And there's no discount here. And there's no, there are no fees associated with this group of students. And here's the certificate. And then here's the total. So I wanted to show you a couple of aspects about this spreadsheet that can be useful. So here we have a discount for the part-time students. And in the first year, it's a little over $4,000, but overall, we have over $83,000 in discounts for this student. So if we say, what happens if we don't give a discount to the students? So I'll talk a little bit about the discounting right now. This is the one tab that we use here for input, for the information that's required to make this thing run. The discount rate is dependent on the school. As you can see, saw it before too, I've got this assigned to the College of Arts and Science. But as I said, the discount rate depends on, in part, what discipline this is. So if I change this to the College of Medicine, these numbers down here are going to change immediately. So I have no discount. And that carries immediately through to these reports. There's no discount. But if I change that back to College of Arts and Science, you'll see that 18% here. And I come back and say, you know what? I don't really want to have a discount for the part-time students, so I can overwrite this and just put in 0. And again, what immediately happens is that discount rate for the students goes away, and we have another $80,000 in revenue. We'll change that back again and show you another different aspect to this too. So say if I said, you know, the full-time students, we usually charge a comprehensive fee for this. So I can change this to a comprehensive fee, and I'm going to change this to $20,000 per year. So actually, let me highlight that first. So here we have 3 students. tuition is $20,000 now. It's $60,000. We still have the discount, the 18% discount. So we have, again, the difference between the gross and the net tuition. But I'm going to highlight this line again. So $60,000. And I'm going to go back to what we had before. And so we're going to change the per credit fee in $1,100. And all of a sudden now, we see that it's, again, 54 credits times the 1,100, it goes back. So we can change things pretty quickly in here and then see the impact in other reports. So change this again to comprehensive. Oops. Comprehensive, $20,000. The revenue side. Oh, yeah. It'll pick it up here as well. It doesn't, I'm sorry, I forgot. It doesn't show you the individuals. So individual, but again, it picks it up immediately here. The other thing I wanted to show is the settings. So for example, here we have the settings for the benefits rates, FICA, increases to faculty salaries, other expenses, other operating expenses increases that we expect, and so forth. But say right now the benefits rate is set at 31%. But this year we had an exceptionally good rate for our healthcare. And all of a sudden the average declined significantly. So on the expense side here, we have a $32,500 benefit expense in the first year. And that's based on the 31%. If I change this to 20%, and go back here, and again, it immediately picks it up. So again, that settings page is something that's terribly important. So Elmer, you have a question. Tom, I don't know.
Sorry, yes, I did. I had a hard time getting to my unmute. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, I know you've worked with a number of schools using this, certainly at Jefferson where you developed it, but you've worked with some other schools. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how schools use this and what differences maybe you saw in the way that schools made use of the template that you've developed.
Yeah. So again, just turn to the input page for a second here. And what I generally see is that schools have developed something that focuses on the expense side. But the revenue side, especially when you start including things like retention rates and discount rates, it's really difficult to develop something like this where you can actually compare projects. So again, I don't know of too many institutions that come up with one new program proposal a year. It's unusual. So if we're trying to compare maybe 3 or 4 different program proposals, you can do that with this and have reports that are consistent across all of the different proposals. So it makes it much easier to compare one proposal to another. Rather than trying to come up with, and I've seen this before too, where people are able to include retention rates and those sorts of things, but they may include it in different ways. So it becomes a little bit more difficult to compare projects across each other. The other thing too is one of the things people ask me is, can we look at existing programs through this? Yeah, you can. Instead of just putting in what your projected number of students are, you put in the actual number of students. Instead of putting in projected expenses, you put in actual expenses, actual tuition rates, and those sorts of things. The other thing that I've been asked to do is to take these reports and then look back. So once we've, I'm going to stop sharing this for a little bit. Once we've developed a program, how does it do in 3 years? How is it performed? So we can go back to the projected number of students and the projected expenses and revenue and so forth, and we can actually compare it with the actual. And again, there's a report that shows the actual versus the projected. Well, okay, yeah, maybe the program did much better than we expected, or maybe it didn't do quite as well. What can we do to address those issues? Or do we need to hire more people? Spend more money for more? I don't know. But again, it gives us a better way to look at things over time and across projects that wouldn't normally be possible. So I don't know if that answers your question or more, but so I have some other questions here too.
Yeah, that's a good approach there. I appreciate that.
Sure. If I could have, I don't know who NC is, but if I could have them join us and answer the question.
It's actually Nuno.
Actually,
me. Nuno. Oh, sorry, Nuno. Okay, sorry.
No,
I should know that.
Yeah. No worries. Yeah, I was just wondering, in all your years of experience doing this, how many times does it happen that a school says, I don't think that program's going to work? And all of a sudden the numbers show, well, you've got great promise, right? Or the opposite.
So I go through the math with people, and I can do that. Let's see. Yeah. So I'm going to have to share my screen again for a second.
Please do.
So I'll show you, I've got this one cell marked. And what this does is it shows you the formula up here, okay? And what it's doing for this particular instance is one school asked me to include the GL numbers, the general ledger numbers. So the CFOs, when they're putting this in for, if the program's been approved, putting it into their budget, they have the GL numbers right handy. But if we look at some of these other formulas, again, there are ways of backtracking these formulas. Backtracking these formulas. And some of them are not very complicated. Others tend to be quite complicated. So down here, one of the things it looks at is whether or not there's a comprehensive fee or not. Comprehensive tuition, excuse me, or not. And if it is, it'll go into a different cell. It'll go into this cell. So some of the formulas are quite complicated. And if we go to this one tab, this notes tab, and intermediate calculations, this is where a lot of the calculations take place in the background. And it's typically hidden. This and the settings page are typically hidden. The only ones that show up really are the input page and the report pages. But these are all lookup tables. So it says, okay, what year should I input into this? And it depends on what's currently in a particular cell. So it'll add things later on. But this calculates here the retention rates up here. So it's an overall retention rate and then the individual retention rates over the years. And as I said, these tabs are hidden, but again, for the upper level administrators, I show them where these things are and how to access them. But typically they're not visible. So we can actually, like I said, we can actually run through the math on some of these questions. So for instance, I was saying, over here we have 54 credits times the $1,100. You should come up with this figure, okay? And if there's an 18% discount, that's what it should be. So we can run through the math. So again, I don't know if that answers the question that you had, but Elmore, you have another question?
Yeah, if I can jump in, I think the what if analysis is very interesting, and I think a powerful element of what you're putting forward here. Can you talk a little bit about what you think the most powerful elements of the what if analysis are? Where
Yeah.
schools make mistakes, where schools can change what they do, and have the greatest impact on their decision making.
So I like to have what I call a driver, somebody who drives the spreadsheet a little bit. And that's the person that meets with the people who are proposing the program. And it is very powerful because, again, so I talked for a few minutes about the CIP code. So I meet with the program director and the people who are designing the curriculum to talk about what's an appropriate CIP code to use. But when we get down to other things, so very often I'll have people say, oh, well, we project 25 students in this particular year. And I'll say, well, what's the basis for that? Can you explain that a little bit to me? And so we'll talk through that and I'll say, well, I have some data here. And I usually use some data from, as most people know, IPEDS and the US Department of Education, and show what other programs are doing in terms of their enrollment. So that's one thing. But where it really matters is down on the expense side. And typically what I'll see is the proposal will include a lot of front-loaded costs. So they'll say, oh, well, we have to have 3 faculty. So we'll put them all in year 1. And as a matter of fact, in the seed year. And I said, you don't have any revenue in the first year. So if you have, $300,000 or $400,000 worth of expenses in the first year, that doesn't look so good. So is there a way that we can spread these things out a little bit? And you'll be surprised how open people are to conversations like that. I was amazed the first couple of times I did that. And it really does make a huge difference in terms of what the margins, what impact it has on the margins. And then, of course, the way I explain it is that if you show that you can break even in the first couple of years, even if you have to put off some of these expenses, I said, people are much more willing to accept this proposal than deny it. So, would you possibly think about those sorts of things? And again, I think those conversations are a very important part of this. So, anyway, does that answer your question, Omar?
Yeah, that's a good illustration of that.
So I don't know if there are any other questions, but I'd like to go back to the slides for a few minutes. Oops. So we talked a little bit about these sorts of things, but again, what we've done with this particular program is I've used fictitious settings and national averages. There's no program that I've actually worked on that looks like this. And it's important, again, to stress that I think it's important for academic leadership to adjust these settings frequently, at least on an annual basis, because those things change at least once a year. And that even though it's structured as a pro forma, as Elmore said, we can use it as what if, and we can use it as a post-launch assessment of programs. So there are lots of different uses for this. I want to thank everybody for their time. And again, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to send either Nuno or myself some questions, and we'll be happy to answer those as much as we can. And then a plug for the upcoming webinar series.
Thank you so much, Lloyd, for that very, very in-depth description of the model you've developed. And like Lloyd said, if anyone in the audience would like to dig deeper into the model, speak with Lloyd separately, we're happy to set up some time. You see either my email or Lloyd's email on the slide. As you can tell, the model is very, very robust. It's taken years to develop, test, and implement. But it's actually so good that there has been one or two universities that have retired the models that they previously had, some of which cost them a lot of money from, the big consulting companies. And they've started to use Lloyd's model instead. So if you want to take an opportunity to speak to what we certainly consider one of the most foremost experts on the topic, we're happy to set up some time. We'd also like to invite you to the webinar that's happening next Thursday, and also the webinar that's happening the following Thursday. Next week's webinar will focus on optimizing operations at a university, and the following one will focus on using IT to innovate and differentiate an institution. So with that, once again, thank you all for joining. It's been a pleasure. We look forward to having you, hopefully, next week and the week after. Thanks again. Take care.